All the President's Men, 1976. In June 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate complex. At first, the incident was treated as a simple burglary, with no indication of the political consequences it would bring. 2 young journalists from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, began investigating the case using confidential sources and overlooked documents. They discovered that the burglars were connected to President Richard Nixon's re-election committee and that campaign funds were being used for illegal activities such as wiretapping and political sabotage. Information from secret sources, including Deep Throat, and recordings from the White House revealed a large-scale cover-up. The investigation led to impeachment proceedings and President Nixon's resignation in 1974, proving the power of investigative journalism and its ability to change history. Catch Me If You Can, 2002. The film tells the true story of Frank Abagnale, who committed a series of sophisticated frauds before the age of 19. He successfully posed as an airline pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer while forging millions of dollars in checks. Although the film dramatizes some events for cinematic effect, the main story is true. Abagnale was eventually arrested by the FBI and later worked with them, helping prevent financial fraud. His story shows the intelligence behind his crimes and the persistence of law enforcement in tracking him down. Memories of Murder, 2003. This film is based on real serial murders that took place in South Korea between 1986 and 1991. The case involved multiple victims and remained unsolved for many years, causing fear and frustration throughout the country. The main characters are inspired by real detectives, and the major events are true. While some dialogue and scenes are dramatized, the film accurately portrays the pressure, failures, and emotional impact of one of South Korea's most notorious criminal cases. Monster, 2003. In the early 1990s, Florida was shaken by the crimes of a woman who would later become one of the most controversial figures in American criminal history, Aileen Wuornos. Her story did not begin with murder, but with a life marked by violence, abandonment, and extreme poverty. Growing up in harsh conditions, Aileen endured repeated abuse that deeply shaped her life and the tragic decisions she would eventually make. Between 1989 and 1990, she became involved in a series of murders, primarily targeting men she encountered while working along highways. At first, investigators struggled to understand the motives behind the crimes, while the media portrayed her case as one of the most sensational in modern history. The central mystery was not her identity, which was known, but the true nature of her actions and the reasons that led her to kill. As her psychological and social background remained largely unknown to the public, the investigation revealed that multiple factors influenced Aileen's behavior, including severe childhood sexual abuse, family abandonment, lack of social support, and constant external pressure. She was identified and arrested by authorities in January 1991. Her trial became a complex and highly publicized process, followed closely across the United States, and ultimately ended with a death sentence. The film Monster seeks to portray the person behind the crimes, focusing on the psychological damage and trauma that shaped her life rather than solely on the acts themselves. From a legal standpoint, the mystery was fully resolved, the perpetrator was identified, the evidence was confirmed, and justice was carried out according to the law. However, her story continues to spark debate about the relationship between life circumstances, trauma, and personal criminal responsibility.
ARGO, 2012. In 1979, Iran was in the midst of a revolution that overthrew the Shah and replaced his regime with a strict Islamic government. During this period of chaos, 6 American diplomats became trapped in Tehran after militants stormed the U.S. embassy. The CIA developed an extraordinary rescue plan. To extract the diplomats, they created a fake Hollywood film studio and invented a fictional science fiction project titled Argo. The real mystery was not the identities of the diplomats, but whether the operation itself would succeed and if they could escape Iran safely without being discovered. Through creativity, patience, and flawless coordination between the CIA and embassy personnel, the true story behind Operation Argo demonstrates not only the success of an almost impossible mission, but also how intelligence, imagination, and strategic thinking can resolve real-life crises that seem completely hopeless. Spotlight, 2015. Between 2001 and 2002, the Boston Globe assembled an investigative journalism team known as Spotlight, which took on the task of examining allegations of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church in Boston. For decades, these abuses had been systematically covered up, with perpetrators often transferred from one parish to another in order to avoid accountability. The journalists uncovered a deeply rooted and organized network involving dozens of clergy members, institutional protection by church authorities, and the far-reaching influence the church held over public institutions and the families of victims. The central mystery was not whether abuse had occurred, but the shocking scale of it and the extent to which it had been deliberately concealed for years. After a long and meticulous investigation based on testimonies, official documents, and in-depth interviews, the Spotlight team published a series of articles that exposed the truth to the world. Their work led to legal and institutional reforms and became one of the most powerful examples of investigative journalism in modern history. The mystery of silence was finally broken, and justice began to take its course. Dark Waters, 2019. In the 1990s, attorney Robert Bilott took on what initially appeared to be an ordinary legal case. A local farmer was concerned about the unexplained illness and death of his cattle, as well as the contamination of the water supply near his land. As Bilott began to investigate, he uncovered a far more disturbing reality. The powerful chemical corporation DuPont had been polluting the local water sources for decades, exposing surrounding communities to toxic substances. The central mystery was the true scale of the contamination and whether the corporation would ever be held accountable for the damage it had caused. Bilott launched a long and complex investigation. Painstakingly reviewing thousands of internal corporate documents, analyzing scientific evidence, and engaging in legal battles that stretched on for years, as the case gained public attention, the evidence revealed that DuPont had knowingly concealed the dangers of the chemicals it released into the environment. Eventually, after a prolonged and highly public legal process, the company was forced to acknowledge its responsibility. Legal penalties were imposed, and compensation programs were established for the affected victims. The true story behind Dark Waters demonstrates that persistence, integrity, and concrete evidence can expose even the darkest corporate secrets, proving that justice can prevail despite overwhelming power and resistance. Richard Jewell, 2019. In 1996, during the Atlanta Olympic Games, a violent bombing shocked the public. Richard Jewell, a security guard at the event, was the first to discover the explosive device and helped save many lives by alerting authorities and clearing the area. Initially praised as a hero, he was almost immediately transformed into a suspect by the media and law enforcement. The central mystery was who had carried out the attack and why Jewell was wrongly accused. Intense media scrutiny and public pressure led to damaging assumptions about his character, despite a lack of concrete evidence. As the investigation continued, new evidence eventually led authorities to identify the true perpetrator. Richard Jewell was officially cleared of all suspicion, but the damage to his reputation had already been done. The true story highlights how media narratives and public pressure can distort justice, while careful investigation and factual evidence are essential to uncovering the truth and restoring innocence. The Boston Strangler, 2023. During the 1960s, the city of Boston was gripped by fear following a series of murders targeting women, crimes that became known collectively as the Boston Strangler case. For a long time, investigators were uncertain whether the killings were committed by a single individual or by multiple perpetrators. The lack of clear evidence and the fragmented nature of the clues made the investigation extremely difficult. While the city lived under constant anxiety, the true mystery centered on identifying the killer and understanding the motive behind the crimes, as well as determining how justice could be achieved for the victims and their families. Years of investigation, combined with the later use of new evidence and modern forensic techniques, eventually led to the confirmation of the primary perpetrator's identity, allowing the case to be officially closed. The real story behind the Boston Strangler highlights the challenges faced by law enforcement when confronting complex and frightening crimes, and underscores the importance of persistence, careful investigation, and evolving investigative methods in resolving some of history's darkest and most unsettling mysteries.